Welcome to TAMA Talks, brought to you by the Torrance Art Museum Advocates. I'm Janine Madden, current TAMA president, and I'd like to thank you for watching. Today, we will be discussing work which is currently on view in the main gallery at the Torrance Art Museum in a show called Studio System. The Studio System Experimental Residency Project is a unique attempt to bridge the gap between artistic practice and the public. First held in 2015, Studio System seeks to bring the dynamism of the artist's studio into the museum space, encouraging audiences to not only see works as they are in progress, but to interact with the artist to discuss inspirations, sources, thoughts, feelings, content, and context, as well as chart the progress of the works over the month-long period that the project encompasses. This exhibition is on view through June 29th and culminates in a closing reception that same night from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. The reception is open to the public and we invite you to attend. The museum is located at 3320 Civic Center Drive in Torrance, California, and is open Tuesday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Admission is free and donations are gratefully accepted. This discussion is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel with all of our previous TAMA Talks. You can access it from our website, www.tamadvocates.com. Joining us today is Studio System resident artist Gwen Samuels. Gwen considers her work mixed media installation. She is based in Los Angeles with a studio in Santa Monica. She is originally from New York, where she completed a BFA in textile design at Syracuse University. Gwen has shown in numerous group exhibitions, both locally and internationally. Locally in 2023, she was invited to show in an exemplar comprehensive group show in Southern California called Connective Threads. In 2022, Gwen was commissioned to create a 6-foot by 4-foot by 3-inch kimono, combining Japanese culture and patterning inspired by tapas cloths from Pacific Islanders for a Four Seasons hotel in Hawaii. Her works and art inspirations have been covered by various media and publications, including Shout Out LA, Modern Luxury San Diego, Art and Cake, Voyage LA, among others. So thanks so much for joining us today, Gwen. We're really excited to have you here with us to tell us about your work in Studio System at the Torrance Art Museum.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here and thank you for this opportunity. To begin, I want to give you an idea of what I'm thinking about when I make my art. I have to say it's the materials that drive my inspiration. I'm interested in transforming familiar materials in unexpected ways. The imagery I'm using is my photos of shapes and patterns that I reconfigure and print on transparency. I love how the material interacts with light to create a new visual experience. Today, I want to share my most recent series called Mind Springs, which I started working on when I was accepted into Studio Systems, the Experimental Residency at TAM. This residency made me excited, and my creative juices started the planning process to create a series around a found object. I chose some antique bed springs, which I had worked with years ago in a different way, but now had new eyes seeing the found object. I decided I would build my wire sculptures around the spring. I was ready to begin, and the work concepts around the new series, Mind Springs, had sprung. As I said earlier, I began several months before the residency because my process is time-consuming, and I wanted to fully explore my ideas that would integrate my current work, which is making wire sculptures, while balancing the positive and negative spaces and proportions of my patterns. In this new series, I was planning to build out and around the found object, the bed spring. Now let's get to the art.
So here's a shot of you in the space in the TAM. This, I think,
Oh,
was
good,
posted on Instagram.
good.
And so the idea behind Studio System at the museum is that in the main gallery space, each artist who's chosen to participate gets a small little section of the museum. And I think, are there 12 of you?
Yep, there's one outside.
Oh, right. Ashton's outside.
Right.
So, so the museum space has been divided up, and this is your little corner of the world.
In the first image, you see three different pieces. Breaking boundaries, is it a flower? And the third image, which is expanding ideas. And it's important to notice the two pieces on the right, all I was doing really was learning to work with the materials and supporting the circle, just simply working around the circle. And then in the other piece on the left side, you can see that I got a little adventurous and I started to think about breaking out and changing the composition. I was ready to move away from the circular spring and start expanding and thinking about my sculptural ideas, which were balancing the positive and the negative space and the proportions of the pattern. Okay, in the next image, we see two pieces, and you can see that I'm really changing the shape. If you look at the, actually, I have them in reverse. So the one on the right is called What's Old is New, and I'm getting larger. So you can notice that. And I feel like the piece on the right, which is called What's Old is New, is just everything that I had been thinking about. It was kind of coming together. I feel like I found my groove and I was able to incorporate everything I'd been trying to say in this new story that I was trying to create. And I found a new place for the spring. You can see it, it's up on the right side, sort of even on an angle. And then the other piece is called New Ideas Keep Coming, a little bit smaller. And you can notice the first thing that the imagery is completely different. And that's because it was more uniform and it was from an earlier format that I was working with before I learned Photoshop. But again, you can still see that I'm playing with that spring. I'm moving it into a different spot, and now it's front and center. And I'm still continuing my ideas about opening of spaces and how everything interacts. And by the way, I hadn't mentioned this earlier, but you can also notice there's lots of strings hanging all around. And you're going to see that consistently throughout all the work.
So those
Okay.
are hand-tied strings that you add?
No, that's the way all the pieces are stitched into place. Everything's hand stitched.
Ah, I
So
see.
these strings are hanging freely. And what's really cool about the strings is if there's a breeze or any movement in the room, they move and it kind of activates the surface. And I also like this idea that it almost confirms this idea of a work in progress. My earlier work, my strings were much shorter. So now they're part of the piece.
Okay, so in the next image, I think we get a closer look at what's old is new.
Oh, good. Okay, and these are close-ups and you can see them a little better.
So that's fabric. Tell us a little bit about the
Oh,
construction, if you will.
okay. Thank you. Thank you for asking, because I forget. I know everything and I forget what people don't know. And I must say that, during this residency and also in all my open studio visits, the first thing that the person who comes over to look at my work asks is, what's the material? And because no one's ever seen this before, and I'm blown away that I found it, but I don't really know how that happened. So the material I'm working with, I call transparency. So it's see-through, the light passes through and casts shadows. and then I print my imagery on it. So it's a kind of plastic, which is the only part that's the downside. But the other part is the work will last.
So like a transparency in school, like
Yes, except that
teaching
this
math.
one is, yes, and people ask that question also. Yes,
Yes,
like an overhead projector.
correct, right.
Yes, 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 except that this kind of transparency has a roughness on one side. It's very subtle, and the ink sticks to it.
I see. So you make, I'm using air quotes, but you make the fabric appear through a process by which you are printing it onto the transparency, and then you manipulate the transparency by cutting or somehow in and fit it into the spaces, almost like a stained glass.
Yes, yes to all of the above.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good. Thanks for breaking it down. And I also want to point out, since I was in the found object mode, you can see some of the wire, even though it's not really, really crisp, but you can see that some of the wire has like little lines on it.
Yes.
And that's because, yeah, thank you. And that's because that was some found object wire that I found. Someone gave me a spool of wire.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So I think the next piece,
Yeah,
um,
we're
front
ready for the
and
next and last. Yes. Okay, so this is where I am now. And one of the wonderful things about this opportunity at TAM is because my work is always changing, and particularly because this is a series, um the viewer gets to see a progression, and you're getting to see that also in this video. And that's something that I really love, having the opportunity, because I really don't think seeing one of my pieces really gives you any real depth in what I'm doing, or what kind of artist I really am. All you get to see is where I am now. And that was the exciting part about being in this residency. You can see the progression from the beginning to where I am now. And this is the most recent piece, the sixth piece, and it's called Front and Center and All Around. And it's the largest. It's 36 inches by 34 inches by 5 inches. So it comes out off the wall. And you'll get to see that in the other two images that I've included in this presentation. And in this one, it's very, very three-dimensional in composition. And as I said, it's larger, and it's reinforcing 3 springs wired together. And also the best part is you can see that I'm still thinking about the open spaces and the varying proportions of my imagery. So I've touched all my bases, changed the shape a little, even though it is a little bit circular, it is a little bit irregular. So I have to say, I'm very pleased with how it ended up. And can we see the other 2 pieces?
absolutely. And I just want to say too that this piece seems to be the largest then of all the
Correct.
pieces you've, okay. And
Yes.
it's so sculptural in its dimensionality. I love that.
Yeah, it's, one of the other harder parts about working with the materials that I've chosen is that it's hard to photograph.
Yeah,
And
right.
you can't get everything in there all the time, but you can see how amazing the transparency when it's well lit, how it really does cast shadows. And none of that is altered. It's really there when you're seeing the piece. And then if you look also, there's some little white kind of thread things on the sides also. Yeah, great, thank you. That's another found wire that somebody gave me that I decided to incorporate. So it just, it really, using the springs really set a tone for me for thinking about a lot of new things I have not worked with before. So I was thrilled. And let's look at the last image of this piece, if we can.
We can. And before we navigate there, I just want to say the shadow has a painterly quality to it that almost looks like a brush stroke.
Oh, thank you for that. That's so cool.
It's
Okay, see, that's the other part about sharing and talking with others. I don't see everything. So I love when somebody points things out to me because that's the other part, the joy of conversation. I can see what you see too, and who knows, it might lead me at another time in another direction. So thanks for that.
so here's the close-up of front and center and all around.
Yeah, and that usually, is the most exciting part for me because, I've been doing this for about 15 years, not necessarily sculptural, but I've been working with this material because my original work was flat. And I really, really, really developed a vocabulary for putting together pattern. And it was one of my big breakthroughs with this piece. You can notice on the right side in the middle, the proportion of the pattern is large. That was some tie-dyed ribbons that I found. And thank you for pointing it out. And also then you can really see those little strings I told you about, those random strings that sort of stick out everywhere. So there's a lot going on, but it shows you, how many patterns and you know what else is the great part? Because when you change the proportions and you leave the blank spaces, it's really interesting because your eye starts to fill in things that I didn't necessarily anticipate. And I love hearing people share that and what they see in the patterns.
Yes, absolutely. It is. It's very visually engaging. And I'm drawn particularly, maybe because my science background, I'm drawn particularly to the stitching. So is that all hand stitched?
Yes. And
Wow.
that's the other second question. They say, how did what are the threads from or whatever? And I say, well, it's all hand stitched into place because I can't think of any other way to attach the imagery to the wire sculpture. And the other part, and really, this was an amazing, amazing, lucky accident. It seems that when I combine the wire form with the material of the transparency and the stitching, which is slightly irregular, the combination of the three allows me to resculpt it if I choose at any time. So I can go right up to the piece and bend it and nothing happens. Everything gives and lets me.
Wow. And that's the
Yeah.
quality of the transparency and the wire, obviously.
Yeah, and I think the stitching too. It holds it in place, but it doesn't hold it in place in such a rigid way that there's a little bit of play. I think. I don't know, but
It,
it works.
is it a fabric, like a cotton thread, or is it a wire stitching?
Oh, good question. The thread is an upholstery thread that
Okay.
is a kind of polyester, unfortunately, again, plastic, but I really want the threads not to fade.
Okay. So the long term.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the long term, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your point of view.
Right. Well, again, I'm going to navigate to the piece in its entirety, and you really can see the again, as you mentioned, the vibrancy of the colors is probably much more significant in person. And so, one of the reasons why we do the TAMA talks is so that we kind of give people a sneak peek of the work so that when they get to see it in person, they can say, wow, this just looks so different than what I saw on the video. And this piece sounds like it may be falling into that category, particularly on the vibrancy of the ribbon that you found.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, and I also want to add to that that very often, the camera, or the I use my iPhone, brings it all together. But basically, I found with my work that in person does not compare to the photographs
Sure.
because, it's sort of a shorthand, from the camera.
Mhm.
And really, they've come a long way and it's really fantastic. But in person, you can see everything. Also, I encourage people to touch, which
Oh,
is another, yeah, it's another mind blower for people when they come in to see my work. I say you're welcome to touch.
oh,
And and that's the other part. People can't wait because they've never seen this material before and they want to have that experience. So that's another part we can't get from the video. You can't touch.
absolutely. And you're the first artist that I have spoken to who actually has said those words. So
I know. And it
how
and
nice is that?
it's really funny because the people that are sitting around me in the big room at TAM, we hear each other interacting with the public. And I say to them, I hope you are not bored to tears listening to me telling everybody they can touch. And it's just fascinating to see people's responses. So I'm happy I can, give them that experience.
Absolutely. And I think that, you're also bringing to light one of the aspects of studio system that I think is part of, well, two things. Part of its inception is that experimental, it in and of itself is this experiment of bringing artists together who may or may not have a commonality, but by the time the show ends, there is a coalescence that occurs. And then secondly, that idea that you yourself as the artist have an opportunity to sort of experiment with, like you said, let me see, I think it was expanding ideas, this idea that, you're in a new space and now, I mean, is it okay to say that these are sort of site-specific installation pieces that you did specifically for the TAM show?
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was super interested in creating a series and planning because as you can imagine, it's very time consuming. I wanted to have some kind of new experience and I also, wanted to have something great to show. It checked all my boxes because the other part was I'm very interested in installation. Although, by the way, any one of these pieces can stand alone. But for me, I love the interaction and you can see that when you come to TAM and see the whole thing all together. um and I really want to say I'm pleased with the series and I hope you've enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed sharing with you because I always learn new things when I talk to people, and I really never know how my work is going to evolve because I'm responding to materials in real time. And I just don't know. Sometimes things don't work out. Um, but I enjoy working in a series because it helps me work out all the ideas and the viewer gets to see my progression. And I think that part's really important too, because we can really talk about where I started and where I ended. So I really thank you for the opportunity to share my work with the TAM audience. It's been great, and doing this video has been great.
Fantastic. That's great. I'm so pleased. I want to thank you very, very much for joining us. I had one last question, which was, your work is so tactile. Do you have any of the materials that you use, the transparency, that sort of the wire, the stitching? Do you have them in isolation there for people to kind of examine as they look at how they all interplay in the work?
Absolutely. Everything is out on the table. I work pretty neatly. I mean, you can see that in the image on the screen right now. I'm working on a larger three-dimensional dress form, but I work on a board that's sort of a foam core board because I poke all the holes before I stitch. So
Oh,
yeah, I have an awl. It's laying down on the side there. It's sort of straight. And so I do that. So everything is there for you to touch and see. And it's pretty neat. I pull out everything and actually it's all laying on the board while I'm working. And I enjoy the interaction and all the questions.
In your bio, we mentioned the kimono, and I have an image of it if you're okay with me sharing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a crazy yes. Oh my God. There it is at the Four Seasons Hotel on the island of Lanai. And it was an amazing opportunity. And I learned so much about my materials, and it is 6 feet tall, and I'm 5'1", and oh, and yes, there's so many things I learned. And it is three-dimensional in the round. I mean, if you were 6 foot, you could put it on. And I learned so many things. The circles in the front that are going down the front and on the sleeves, that was superimposed on top afterwards to make it look more dimensional. So that was something I'd never done before. So that's the other thing. I'm always in process. I never know if some new idea is going to come up that's going to work. But I will say in this piece, I was using a much, much heavier wire because I was not sure if it was needed for a 6 foot piece. And I also want to mention that as you said in my bio, the imagery was from these tapas cloths that I looked at, and then I created my own. So it's my interpretation of the Pacific Islander tapas cloths. And
Wow.
then the shape was the kimono, integrating the two cultures,
So,
Japanese.
so now I'm hoping that you'll be able to share with us your website so that
Oh, sure.
go on and take a look at other work you've done.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. Okay, so my website is gwensamuels.com, and then Instagram is at Gwen Samuels. So both places, I've got lots of imagery, and you can reach out to me if you have more questions or you're interested in any of the pieces.
Will you be at the closing on the 29th?
Of course.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to next week because I have no idea, how everything is going to be coming together, and how it's even going to look in the gallery, how much of our actual studio environment is going to stay in the show. So it's all coming next week, so I don't know.
Well, the nice thing about that is Max is pretty, he's pretty amenable. So I'm sure the answer will be whatever you want to do is probably is going to be his answer. And again, the nice thing about your piece from a tactile perspective is that number one, it can be touched. And number
Yes.
two, I really feel like, when we go to art openings, at the TAM, typically they're done at the beginning. We never really get to see the tools of the trade per se of how the work is created.
Oh,
And
good. Okay.
so,
I'm glad you're sharing that.
yeah,
Okay.
I think if you have the option,
Okay.
that's a very engaging kind of, experience that people don't even from paint and paintbrushes perspective. Um,
Okay, I will definitely mention that. I think everybody's open to everything. I mean, I have to tell you, the first 2 weeks, everybody was kind of getting to know each other, but I think at this point, this third week, I think was the pivotal week where we kind of know each other, and I think that everybody's open to anything and everything. So
good,
yeah,
good.
I'll bring that up. I also want to say one last thing about my work. People are always afraid to touch because they feel that, first of all, they've been trained not to touch, but
Correct.
the second part is that they're worried it's fragile. And
Yes.
I want to go back to that idea and just tell you, as I said earlier, it bends. It's not fragile. I can move anything to adjust anything. So it's not fragile and it can be touched. So I know I'm sort of reorienting my audience, but they like it. They like to be able to engage.
Absolutely. Well, I thank you so very, very much for telling us a little bit more about your pieces. And I would encourage people to head over to the TAM next week or this
Yes,
week. I don't even know what day it is, Friday.
next week. Yeah, next week, the 29th. Yeah.
If
So
you
we'll see.
head over this week, you'll still see artists, putting.
Oh,
those-
yes. This is our last week. Yes.
Okay,
Yes. Thank you. This was great.
absolutely.